You may know that these presentations are being recorded. Bishop Kendrick has some way of also uploading these to a program he's purchased for priests and deacons, and so I do want to the rector is not here. All is well. I've got this whole crazy thing in my head about how many so-and-so does it take to change a light bulb. So I'll just try one of them. How many Episcopals does it take to change a light bulb?
I know this.
3. 1 to call the electrician, 1 to mix the cocktails, and 1 to talk about how much you like the old light bulb better. And only an Episcopal will understand that joke, right? Or me. Just as a word about next week, John Hodges, my colleague at the center, John is PhD psychologist and a dear friend. He will be here next week, and he will be talking about anxiety disorders and PTSD, so I look forward to being a part of that with you. And the next week we talk about substance use disorders, addiction diseases, and that topic. And then John will be back the next week to talk about ADD, ADHD. And John has a tremendous amount of gifts and talents in that area as well. Let me say a couple things about tonight. We're going to be together for 7 weeks, and this is by far the most complicated to listen to and be a part of, and it's the most complicated for me to try to teach. Part of it is I don't know anybody's history in this room, a few people. And so I don't know if this has been part of your life experience. I don't know if this has been part of your own journey with your family. And so I want to be sensitive to the fact that I could say something that could be offensive, and that's certainly not my desire. I do know I'm going to make somebody angry every day of my life, but it's not intended. And if that's the case, please have a conversation with me about that. This is a really, really complicated topic. Let me tell you a story. When I started my clinical training in New Orleans in 1977, I was sitting in an on-call room with a Roman Catholic priest who had started his training with me. And Jim O'Neill, Jim was on the faculty at Notre Dame Seminary, and really, really, really smart guy, and a good theologian. And the phone rang. Jim happened to be the on-call chaplain that evening, and the phone rang, and he answered the phone. And so I get his side of the conversation, and his side of the conversation went, yes. Blessings. So he hung up, and I said, what was that all about? Someone had called from outside the hospital, had asked the communications person to please connect him to a chaplain. Jim was a chaplain. So the other side of the conversation was, are you a chaplain? Yes. And I ask you a question. I'm thinking about killing myself. Will I go to hell? Guess I better do something else. Thank you. So I said to Jim, I said, do you believe that? Jim said no. I said, well then help me to understand what this is about. And he said, well, that is an old piece of Roman Catholic theology, but I continue to use it, particularly in these situations when I don't know someone. I continue to use it because it keeps a lot of people alive. And I said, well, help me to understand how this evolves. And he said, it's like this in Catholic theology. In Catholic theology, the unpardonable sin is to blaspheme the Holy Spirit. To blaspheme the Holy Spirit, the ultimate expression of blaspheming the Holy Spirit is to give up hope. The ultimate expression of giving up hope is to end your life. Thus, the unpardonable sin is suicide. There was a time in the life of the Roman Catholic Church where one who ended one's life could not be buried in holy ground. You know that. That has changed. And if you read now the teachings of the Roman Catholic Church, much wider berth is there, and the language is much more open and forgiving, and that's a good thing. The interesting thing about this is that there are really only 5 recordings of suicide in the Bible. A couple of these are kind of important for us as we look at this topic tonight. There's the event, if you know your Old Testament, there's the event in Judges where this woman drops a millstone from a tower, whacking Abimelech, and he knew he was going to die, and so he calls for someone to kill him. Okay? And then you have the story in Judges, the Samson story. And do you call that a suicide or do you call that a sacrificial act? But he sacrificed his own life and destroyed thousands of Philistines at the same time. We all know the story of Samuel, of King Saul. 2 Samuel, there's that great story of Ahithophel, who hung himself when he was rejected by Absalom, and we'll talk about this later. Then the story in 1 Kings, Zimri set the pasture on fire and died there rather than being taken prisoner. And then the one we know the best, Judas overcome by remorse. The interesting thing about all 5 of these events in Holy Scripture is there's no editorial comment. There's no, he really did a bad thing, or he's going to hell, or he's blah, 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 whatever. It's just reported. Okay? Even the Judas account, it is simply reported. And so you have to really have to stretch it to say anything theological about God and eternal life and whatever else when we're talking about suicide. Again, as I mentioned last week, I haven't mentioned tonight. If you have questions, please raise your hand when you think of the question. You got there the cheat sheet in front of you, so I'll go ahead and go to it. Let me tell you some really bad news. These are numbers for 2010. I have not been able to insert the numbers for 2014, and these are the most current numbers we have. And the 2014 numbers are really just right there with 2010. Okay. The suicide numbers for this country are, in 2010, we experienced 38,364 suicides. That's an average of 105 a day in this country. And that 12.4 is 12.4 per 100,000. Okay, so for every 100,000 folks, 12.4 chose to end their life. Now you see that we males certainly lead the way here over females. The interesting number for me is right here, and that's most of us guys here in the room, with a couple of exceptions. Right now in this country, 65 plus white guys are leading the pack in suicide. Okay? And there are a lot of reasons for that. If you say we have 700 suicides a week, 105 a day, if you say we have 700 suicides a week, we do. 120 of those suicides are veterans. And that's, several years ago, we were trying to recruit a psychiatrist in town. I was working with this headhunter, and he said to me, I cannot find you a good psychiatrist. And I said, okay, what's the story? He said, the government, the Army, the Navy, they have stolen all the good psychiatrists and they've hired them to deal with this issue. Okay, one of the things we know about Iraq and Afghanistan is there are going to be more non-combat related deaths than combat related deaths. Non-combat related deaths is a euphemism for suicide. Jack?
So over 65 deaths, that would be only Vietnam, right?
Well, it'd be me. I wasn't in the service, but it would be Vietnam. If we're talking about veterans, Vietnam, okay, probably not any World War II, okay, but we're talking about 65 plus Euro-American males, and we're going to talk about it, and not loss of job, but loss of occupational identity and veterans. That's what we're talking about. So you see that what we're doing here is we're kind of killing it here on the numbers when you look at groups. Okay, we're at the top of the list. Okay, now that's kind of what we haven't believed. What we believed is, you know, young adults, and we're going to kind of dispel some myths. But anyway, this is kind of the picture for us as a country. We are averaging 100 suicides a day, 700 suicides a week, and 120 of the 700 are vets. Okay? Now, let me tell you what's really kind of crazy. Really startling. Suicide is number 10. For every one suicide today, 190 people in this country die of cardiovascular disease. 170 people die of cancer-related diseases. So today, when the clock strikes midnight, 1,900 people will have died in 24 hours in this country from cardiovascular death, which I think is kind of just as preventable as suicide for some. 1,700 people will have died of cancer-related deaths. Okay? So you see there, and you have it in the handout, suicide is number 10. Cardiovascular is 193.6 per 100,000. Wow. Suicide always comes in there around number 10. Just to let you know kind of where we are as a country. However, there aren't many symposiums at churches on Wednesday night to deal with cardiovascular issues. Or to deal with cancer-related issues. And we don't ever say, as a community, we don't ever say, gosh, we got to stop being so silent about cardiovascular disease. You know, we really need to start talking more about cancer. No, we don't say that. What we say is, we have got to stop being so silent about suicide. We have got to start conversations around this topic. And remember, if you were here last week, We talked about all the symptomatology associated with depressive disorder, and the last one on the list was suicidal ideation. Okay, and so we do know there is this significant link between depressive disorders and suicide. Yes?
Is the other residual, is that mostly murders?
The other residual, what?
Yeah, number 156.7, 483,000. The other deaths not caused by the 15 above.
At the bottom.
Oh, all other causes residual. Jack, that could be ALS, that could be rheumatoid arthritis, that could be Alzheimer's patients, that could be. It is. I'm glad you said this. That there are a lot of suicides that are not documented suicides. Okay, I've heard some wild stories from people who were going to end their life, but it was not going to look like they intentionally ended their life. There are a lot of ways to die, and that's what this last number is about. We believe that we are experiencing about 1 million suicide attempts every year. We believe there are 25 attempts to every one completed. You're probably not going to hear me use the phrase commit suicide. That's really language that's kind of going away because it sounds like it's a crime. Okay, commit a crime. What we talk about is people dying by suicide, people ending their life. If I say commit suicide, that's just that old tape playing. 3 female attempts for 1 male. However, 4 male completed suicides for 1 female completed. You probably know this. Females tend to use drugs, pills, alcohol, some cocktail like that. Males tend to use guns, things like that. And one of the things we know, and we're going to talk about this also, on average there are 6 survivors. There are 6 people profoundly affected by 1 suicide. In Florida, we are a little bit above the national average. In 2010, we had 2,789 suicides, and that's 14.8 per 100,000. You see what happened in Alabama. I think we were 20th, Alabama was 23rd, and the South is kind of right there in line with Florida and Alabama, just to let you see how that looks. This is interesting for me, and I hope you can hang on to this. This is important. There's been all kind of work done on suicide and all the numbers. Monday, we expect there to be more suicide attempts. We expect the ERs around town to be busier with suicide attempts. Monday is the highest day for suicides, completed suicides. Saturday is the lowest day. Tuesday is second highest, then Wednesday, Thursday, Sunday, Friday. All that makes sense. We're fixing to, unfortunately, get into the Christmas season once again, and so you're going to have all these things that you're going to see on TV about holiday blues and blah, 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 blah. Don't believe it. Okay? Everybody's waiting on Santa Claus. Okay? November and December are the lowest suicide months. Okay? I don't know why people spend all their time doing all this promo business on TV, and why all these people are doing all these programs about let's fight the December, the holiday blues, whatever. One theory is, and I like the theory, not so much for a place like Florida. One theory is in November, December, January, things are cold and bleak and dark, and people who are significantly depressed and people who struggle with suicide kind of feel in sync with the environment. Things are dead and brown and cold and dark and dreary, and people kind of feel like they're kind of there, okay? May and June are the highest suicide months. And so the same theory is there, that things are bursting forth with new life. Grass is green, flowers are blooming, sky is blue. I don't feel in sync with the world around me. I once again feel out of sync. And so when I don't get real worried, I get worried all the time. I'm less worried in November, December. My anxiety about folks I sit with goes up in the springtime. Okay? I think that's important to remember.
Is Monday the highest because of the pressure going back to a work week or what?
The first day of the week, going back to work, yeah. What's the word about General Motors? Don't ever buy a car made on Monday or Friday. Yeah. Right. Angela. That's a great theory. We'll go with that. Yeah. I think we're waiting on Santa Claus, personally. That's right. And then, that's always disappointing. So, yes.
I have found, I've talked to a lot of people that are more depressed in November and December because they are unable to be with family members or they're missing people who have passed on, and because of Thanksgiving and Christmas, they are more down that time of the year than other times.
They're more down, you're right.
Not suicidal, but more depressed.
Yeah, they're down, they're depressed, but they're not going to do that on Christmas Eve. Right. Yeah, we've got depressed people all around us all the time. That's relentless. Okay.
Well, I'm curious because of the relationship between, can't think of the correct term now, but the lack of light in the winter months, which does trigger depression, unless they've abandoned that theory.
No.
In a lot of people.
Seasonal affective disorder.
Yeah, I got it. So that's kind of dissonance too.
Good point. Eric Scheidman is one of our great theorists and researchers around suicide. And he gives us what he calls this list of thwarted needs as a basis for people who get to a place where they want to end their lives. I'm going to refer to a guy named Thomas Joyner, his book, Why People Die by Suicide. Joyner says that if he took all the literature that's ever been written about suicide and compiled a book that lists all the reasons why people end their lives, it would be like 750 different reasons why people end their lives, and the book would be this thick. Okay, so we're going to get to some of that to try to reduce it into some form that we can use. When people are not able to achieve, or when 65 plus, when we lose that ability to continue. Interesting affiliation. Very interesting. We're coming on 9/11 Sunday, 15th anniversary. On 9/11, 2001, there were less than 40 suicides in this country. You know why? Folks wanted to hang around and see what happened. And there was this sense of, this sense of affiliation. There was this sense of I'm part of something that is bigger and more important than me. Loss of autonomy loss of health, loss of freedom, loss of independence, loss of ability to be dominant even in my own life, loss of ability to play, rejection. We're going to talk about that. And I mentioned last week that the Brene Brown TED Talk, the 18-minute TED Talk on shame and guilt, and thought that that one TED Talk received more hits than all the TED Talks combined. Okay. We are people who love to be judgmental, okay, and we love to induce shame and guilt. We do that better than anybody. Shaivan also talked about, and this is a word we're going to continue to use tonight, talked about lethality as a key ingredient. Aaron Beck was also one of our great leaders in this area, and I like what he said, that suicide cannot occur outside the mindset of hopelessness. Suicide is the direct result of hopelessness. And that's something I would want us to pay attention to as we move through this tonight. There are many, many social stressors, loss of primary relationships, loss of health, loss of social definition, loss of occupational definition. This is not the 42-year-old who gets called into the boss's office and says, "This is your last day here." That's loss of job. This is the person who retires, the man or woman who retires, and they are no longer there's the loss of occupational definition, and that is a significant loss.
Does that relate to loss of purpose?
Loss of purpose. Thank you. Loss of purpose. I mentioned last week that we're going to talk just really briefly about adolescence. Adolescent suicidal behavior is incredibly painful. It's incredibly complicated, and it's very different from what we deal with as adults. Adolescence is a household moving day, temporary mess. Adolescents deal with aloneness and isolation. They deal with bullying. They deal with family discord. They deal with impulsivity. One of the reasons why when there is a suicide in one of the high schools in town and the school system rushes counselors to the school is that adolescents can very quickly get into what we know as copycat behavior. Okay? And while there is desire to be helpful to the people who are greatly impacted by one's death, by one's suicide, the other part of that is to try to avoid any copycat behavior. I trained in New Orleans, and there are two bridges, as you know, that go over the Mississippi River, and there were at least 3 or 4 times where someone went up to the middle of the bridge at night, jumped, ended his or her life, and 2 or 3 days later, a family member did the same thing. And it got to the point in Orleans Parish where after a suicide occurred from that spot, police would guard the bridges on both ends for a week or 2 to not let people walk up on the bridge. Okay? And that is real strong issue with adolescents. And if you experience, if you have an adolescent that experiences suicide, I don't care what he or she tells you about how good he or she's doing, you need to call your rector, you need to get some help, you need to make sure that someone with objective eyes is looking at that kid, because your eyes are not objective, okay? Thomas Joyner, he's at FSU. Can anything good come out of Tallahassee? He has written an incredibly helpful book, Why People Die by Suicide. And what Joyner says is that to end one's life, one must acquire the ability to enact a lethal self-injury. And what that means is that and you can't say this is an absolute, but someone who has never contemplated suicide, who gets into a place of real distress, that person has not been able to accrue the ability to enact lethal self-injury. So that person may get into gesturing behavior, which we take seriously. That person may begin to talk about, get into gesturing behavior. But the person has not yet acquired the ability to enact a lethal injury. Now, what does that mean? Well, what that means is, and we see this with military, we see this with law enforcement, we see this with first responders. I was in a restaurant recently in town, and one of their specials of the day, a little throwaway paper thing, was 30% off for first responders. And so the server came over and I said, what's this 30% off for first responders? She said, yeah, that's what we do. I said, well, I'm a pastor. I'm a first responder. And she looked at me like I had 3 heads, And she said, let me go get the manager. I said, no, but we are first responders. And don't think for a minute that Walt and John and whoever else are not first responders, because they are. Every pastor in town is a first responder. Okay? And their phone's always on. Repeated escalating experiences involving pain. Surgeons, physicians, military, past suicidal behavior or suicidal behavior in family, repeated injuries. What we know about the Iraq, Afghanistan suicides is we've got some guys who come back and they're pretty beaten up. They've lost a leg, they lost an arm, they've got all kinds of injuries, okay? So they have repeated injuries. So they have been exposed to repeated pain and repeated witnessing of pain and repeated exposure to pain and provocation. And so what Joyner says, in some ways this is kind of a hopeful word. What Joyner says is that for one to end one's life, one must acquire the ability to enact lethal self-injury. Now, go back to last week. Also, 50% of all suicides, the person is not in treatment. 50% of all suicides, the person is clinically depressed. We know that doing psychological autopsies. The opponent process theory is really quite interesting. Has anyone ever jumped out of a perfectly good plane? Have you? Can you talk about it? The first time you did it?
First time's the easiest one. You don't know what's going to happen.
Oh. We didn't rehearse this very well. You're supposed to say you're scared silly, okay?
Absolutely. Honestly, I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't so much peer pressure. In the military, so you can't not do it. But it was absolutely horrifying.
It was absolutely horrifying. Was it really?
I'm a friend of Mike's anyway, so probably was a good career for it.
Okay. The best example that we have is with repetition, the opposite effect or the opponent process becomes amplified or strengthened. And so most people say the first time they jumped out of a perfectly good airplane, they were scared silly. Then they did it again, and they were scared. And then they did it again, and it was kind of fun. Did it ever get fun? You're just the opposite of what I wanted to hear. You're not helping me one bit, okay?
Senior George Bush
Of course, still jumping out of planes. He's
90.
90-something, okay? He loves it. Well, I wish he were here, not you. How it really is. You got fun. That's not good. Okay. Okay. So what happens is, Kurt Cobain. Okay, we know that Kurt Cobain grew up deathly afraid of guns. Absolutely deathly afraid of guns. And that is how he ended his life. Unless you have a conspiracy theory that his girlfriend did it, but nevertheless. So what becomes, see, we have, while we're talking about suicide as the 10th leading cause of death, why aren't we talking about cancer and neurology and all these things? Because it goes against the grain of who we are and what we believe about life. And we don't understand it. We don't understand it. Okay? But what we know is that as someone continues to become more comfortable with pain, one becomes more addicted to the behavior. Joyner in his book tells this great story about a guy who's up on the bridge, and it's obvious to the folks driving by that he's going to jump. And somebody calls 911. The police officer comes. Has one leg over the rail. What we don't know is like that guy did not yet accrued the ability to enact lethal self-injury. Okay? Yes?
What is the most frequent means of suicide?
Females, pills. The most frequent means by which one ends one's life. Females, pills. Males, guns, knives, hanging.
But that leads in when we talk about medication, that isn't to acquire the ability to enact lethal self-injury also related to alcohol and also being under the effect of a depressant, whether
Right.
it be legal or illegal.
Right, and one of the things there, we know that many suicides were accidental. That as the person continued to grow more comfortable with the pain and would use more of the cocktail, that the person accidentally overdosed. It's ruled as suicide, but it was an accidental overdose from whatever concoction the person came up with.
But wrist slicing and such areas often when
Yeah.
one's intoxicated.
Right, exactly. And then there are a number of cases where the person was intoxicated, when the person was over the legal limit when he or she ended his or her life. Yeah. Let me stop and tell you a horrible story. This is a horrible story. It's a true story. I'm going to be real bland. About 20 years ago, 25 years ago, in a hospital close to Pensacola, little 15-year-old girl presents in an ER around 1 a.m. with some superficial wrist. The ER doctor was tired, frustrated, angry. You know, the thing for us is an acronym of the HALT, H-A-L-T. You don't ever work if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired. Okay? Well, this doctor was probably all of them. And so he says to this little girl, blah, 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 if you really want to hurt yourself, do this. And she was back in the ER 3 hours later, dead. And she had done this. We always take gestures seriously. Always, always. I don't care if it's the 100th gesture. You take it seriously. That hospital just like pulled out a checkbook and said to the parents, fill it out. But that doesn't matter, does it?
No.
No.
Doesn't matter. What Joyner did was to take all those theories, all that research, all that literature, and did us a real favor. And I think did the church a real favor, okay? Because what he did was he boiled it all down to what are we paying attention to with people who are suicidal? Perceived burdensomeness. Key word. Perceived burdensomeness. And thwarted belongingness. Go back up to the first page. Somebody hung oneself in Judges because one was rejected by Absalom. Okay? Thwarted relationships. Thwarted belongingness. So, when we start looking at people who are vulnerable, this is where we look in people who are clinically depressed and people who are not in treatment. Question?
Comment and question.
Yeah.
Do you think possibly since World War II, Vietnam and the things that are going on today, before all of this, when someone had a catastrophic injury in the field, 9 times out of 10 they died. They didn't make it to the places where people are able to make today. And so many of these soldiers that we see that are committing suicide, is this some of the reasons? They feel inadequate, they feel
And back to the shame and remorse.
Yeah, yeah.
Why did I live and he died? Yeah, I think that's, yeah.
And that didn't happen as much because they didn't have the catastrophic injuries and they weren't
Right.
burdens, what they thought was burdens on their families, their friends,
Right.
their loved
Right.
ones.
Thank you. So I think these are the two issues we pay attention to. And this is where Joyner did us a real favor. Okay? So those who desire suicide, those who are capable of suicide, are those who have first begun to or have acquired the ability to enact self-injury. Okay? And deal with issues of perceived burdensomeness and thwarted belongingness. I treated a guy who had all sorts of financial issues and financial problems and high roller kind of guy. Had taken out a life insurance policy. You know, most life insurance policies have a 2-year clause, suicide. And unbeknownst to anyone, he had circled the first day of the 3rd year.
Wow.
And I was still on staff at the hospital then, and sitting with students and got a page, and this guy was in the ER and made a serious suicide attempt. Should have died, didn't. And as we talked later, he let me know that he had drawn a red circle around that day because the insurance company was going to pay his wife $1 million. And it all was wrapped around perceived burdensomeness. I am better off dead. So I think what we also have to do is we have to pay attention to what does the church have to say? How does the gospel speak? Yes.
I'm going back to, everyone can hear me? I'm going back to perceived burdensomeness. At what point in that perceived at what point in that perceived burdensomeness does hopelessness enter in? Because hopelessness is obviously, you know,
That's the basis.
Right.
Is there a
where
basis?
does that enter in?
It's a great question. Not much of what we're doing here tonight is scientific. So where does that enter in? I think it's a part of it. But I think the issue is, how does one continue to become more and more and more comfortable with one's death and managing that level of pain to achieve death because of these issues?
They almost get to the point of euphoria when they've actually made the decision.
Well, yeah, and that's a great point. How many times have I heard in 35 years, wow, he got on medicine, he got regulated, and gosh, he was doing so much better. Well, no, he had just gathered up enough energy to end his life. And don't get me started with insurance companies and hospitalization and psychiatric units. You just got me started on it. I was a unit psychologist for the adolescent stress unit at Baptist for about 10 years. And back then, we could keep a kid 30, 35 days, and we could really do some good work. I mean, we were lights out, okay? Families, siblings, and did great work. Well, you get into DRGs and capitation and insurance companies and all that mess, and all of a sudden, length of stay goes to about 7 or 8 days. Okay, and so we keep 7 or 8. I quit. I just said, no, I'm not going to do this. I knew what was going to happen. Well, what happened was, you get somebody in hospital, which is unfortunately the best way is psychiatrists in town, is to be admitted to the hospital. Rant I won't get into, but anyway, you put someone in the hospital who is clinically depressed. You do an evaluation, thorough evaluation. You get the person started on medicine, which, as we said last week, pop test. It takes how long to work? 2 to 3 weeks. Okay, but after 7 or 8 days, this person who is really, really, really depressed doesn't have the energy to self-harm. But like 7 or 8 days, they start to feel a little bit better, but they're not out of the woods. So what are we doing? We're sending people home with enough energy to end their lives. That's kind of crazy. That's what we're doing, okay? And so, I don't know where that gets to that place. I think that depends on the individual and the individual's life history and repeated exposure to pain and violence and injury and all those kinds of things. But this is what I want you to remember, okay? There's something else I want you to remember. I'm going to say it, I have the damnedest time with pastors trying to get them to understand this, okay? I apologize. I can't say that at Presbyterian Church. I've actually had pastors say to me, oh, no, I don't want to give them any ideas. Dear God in heaven, are you kidding me? You don't want to give them any ideas. Okay, let's say a show of hands, who has not considered suicide as an option ever? Okay? A minority. Okay? Good for you. I hope it's...
Homicide.
I didn't say homicide, I said suicide. Okay, let me re-ask the question. Thinking of suicidal ideation, thinking about suicide is universal. Okay? So my experience is, if I know all this stuff's going on, and I know someone has a history of ideation or a history of gestures, okay, I'm going to say, I need to ask you a question. Are you thinking about ending your life? Guess what happens? It's amazing what happens. People feel listened to. And people feel attended to. And people feel cared for. Nobody has ever said to me, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard in all my life. I cannot believe you would be so cold and insensitive as to ask me that question. What I've heard is, yeah, I know. Okay. Okay, it's on the table. Can we talk? Can we have a conversation? I'm sorry, I didn't do that earlier. A gesture is a behavior that simulates ending one's life. Taking X number of pills rather than X number of pills. A superficial wrist cut. Okay? A hanging.
That would never go through, but.
Yeah, a hanging that your feet hit the floor when,
Right.
when you kick the stool out. A gesture, behavior that mimics attempt suicide. Ideation, thinking about it, ideation with a plan, suicide. Yes?
I'm concerned.
I'm concerned about the children that are 5, 6, and 7-year-olds that hang themselves in the closet with a hanger that are being bullied. Now, what do we do about this? I mean, it's happening.
I think we start conversations. I think we take this to our churches. I think we talk with every kid we can talk to. I think we talk about options to bullying. I think we try to engage as many people. I think we stop being silent about it. I think we talk about suicide like we talk about cancer. That's what I think. And if we started talking about suicide like we talk about cancer, that number is going to drop from 100. That's what I believe. Okay. Never, 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 never shy away from asking someone if they have thoughts or plans to harm themselves. Well, you have your referral right here. There are more talented mental health professionals in this city than you could imagine. Okay? There's no reason not to have. I tell pastors, the first thing you do when you move to a new colony, okay, you don't take the banker to lunch. Okay? The first thing you do is you find a competent psychiatrist, competent psychologist, and you take them to lunch. Take them to lunch when you don't need them. Because if you don't take them to lunch when you don't need them, they're not going to be there when you need them. Okay? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Is that right, John?
I was thinking you eat a lot of lunch.
Breakfast.
Excuse me. Myself, I am a minister. Now, I find the problem of referring, people don't have the money to pay for it. And I've called different psychologists that advertise and say, well, do you accept Medicare? Yes, we do. Now, is that always going to charge? Oh, no. Well, it's a matter of cost. My experience personally on the ground in the trenches has been they just plain don't have the money, and everything comes with the price.
Call me. I got a card over there.
I remember what my grandmother used to say about people invite you, to come visit them. They may not really mean it. And also be careful who you invite, because they may take you up on the offer. So you might be hearing from me.
That'd be great. That's what I do.
Well,
That's what I do. hang on, let me try to finish.
Could I talk to you after class?
Yeah, that'd be great, that'd be great. You can take me to dinner. I've not done this presentation in this format before. I've done this for clergy groups. I love Pope Francis, and I love this quote. And but I think it also works for you. Okay, priests are shepherds to God's people, and shepherds should smell like their sheep. What a great quote. Okay, that Susan and Walt and John and all of the priests should be so close to their people that they smell like their people and they know what's happening in their lives. Okay? The gospel speaks directly to themes of hopelessness. We could sit here all night and think about New Testament passages that speak to hopelessness, that speak to perceived burdensomeness and thwarted relationships or thwarted belongingness. Okay? I got 2 minutes. Amazon Prime, Walter Brueggemann, Spirituality of the Psalms, small book. You can read it in 2 nights. Read it. Okay? What Brueggemann talks about is that all 150 Psalms, he puts them into 3 groups. What he calls Psalms of orientation, Psalms of disorientation, Psalms of reorientation. The real problem is our lectionary is that nobody ever hears the Psalms of disorientation. Okay? We never hear, God, why don't you bash the babies' heads against the rocks? That won't preach. Okay? That kind of hurts the collection. Okay? You don't hear except on Good Friday, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? Where does that come from? Anybody know? Hello? Psalm 22, just before Psalm 23. Words Jesus spoke from the cross. Jesus quoted the Old Testament, a psalm of disorientation. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? They're not preached because they're not in the lectionary. Unless somebody says, I'm going to preach on blah, blah. What Brueggemann says is that the Psalms are like the seasons of life, and we all go through seasons of disorientation. God is not good. God is not just. God is not faithful. And we live in those seasons of disorientation, and somehow, some way, everybody's different. We move into what he calls a new orientation. I sing unto the Lord a new song. Okay? But guess what? We go back into seasons of disorientation. Perceived burdensomeness, thwarted belongingness. So Scripture talks about this, okay? Scripture warns us that we go through these seasons. We don't have choice. It's part of the human condition. So do you have a referral system in place? Great question for pastors. There is a thing called the Baker Act. It basically says, if you know that I am in imminent danger of hurting myself or someone else, you can call Escambia County Sheriff's Department. They can come evaluate me. They can throw me over their shoulder and take me to CSU at Baptist. That's the good news. The bad news is they can keep me for 72 hours. But it's saved a lot of lives. It's helped a lot of people. It's gotten people help. Okay, so you can go online, Google Baker Act, very helpful. Verbal contracts don't work. Do you promise you're not going to harm yourself? Do you promise you're not going to end your life? Well, they don't work. Okay? So what I've done is put together a kind of a crisis card that I have in my office that I have ready. Okay? And I give it to them And it's a contract, it's something they have, they keep it in their pocket, they keep it in their purse, okay? And I have them write about these issues, okay? Verbal contracts do not work, okay? They don't. Trust me. One of the things that we don't do well, and we're going to talk about this in the 6th week, grief and loss, care for the survivors. There is nothing I do day in and day out more complicated than sitting with people who've experienced suicide in their family. There is nothing more complicated. The guilt, why didn't I see this coming? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? The grief. There are 2 groups in town dedicated primarily to survivors of suicide. I can help you to get in touch with people if that's something that...
One other. Compassionate Friends deals a lot with suicide.
Compassionate Friends, right.
Don?
Yes?
Comment. That 6 seems way too low.
Okay. What number, John, do you want it to be?
6 survivors.
Okay.
Yeah.
That seems way too low because it not only goes through the family, it goes out in the community, throughout the congregation, etc.
Well, I think what this means is, I think dramatically impacted is my life is altered day in, day out because of what's happened. Okay? But you're right. I mean, it is a rock in a still lake, and the ripples just go and go and go. There's no question about that. Yeah. Okay. I think we need to continue the conversations, and this is what, when Susan and I were talking, this is what I want us to do. How do we accept and how do we challenge? The whole sweep of biblical history is acceptance and challenge. How do we practice hopefulness? How do we support each other, love each other? How do we engage in difficult conversations? There's a New England Native American tribe. I absolutely love this. This is my favorite slide. The word that they use for God is translated literally, the life in the seed when the seed looks dead. The life in the seed when the seed looks dead. Missed about 3 minutes, Walt, but we're good. We have time for questions. Mary.
One of the things I wanted to mention, thank you. One of the things I wanted to mention was that how important it is for parishioners to make sure that their pastors, priests have an opportunity to refresh their skills, their counseling skills on a regular basis, so that when things change or because the everydayness of ministry can really dull your senses to somebody's serious issues. So I know that there are denominations that don't take this quite as seriously as others, but it's really important for, if you've got a pastor, then that pastor should know this stuff.
Well, yeah, and we share a common love for theological formation and pastoral formation, but the truth of the matter is, if someone stayed in seminary as long as one needed to stay in seminary to learn all this, they never got out of seminary. They'd be there 10 years and not 3 or 4. And these are complicated. I mean, and everything we're doing in these 7 weeks, we assume that pastors know all this. And bless them, they don't. They're not supposed to. But they either project this notion that they do, or you want them to know all this, and they don't. They just don't. Okay.
I had a friend who committed suicide several years ago. And, thank you. Now that I know and many more of us know about what bipolar disorder is. I think that's probably what's going on. She was seeing a psychologist who was a behaviorist, and she would call me. The world, her world, our world was coming to an end. And I carry guilt about this because I eventually got to the point when my husband said, Ann is calling. I'd say, tell her I'm busy. And she walked off a pier and drowned herself. So I guess my question is, I don't have any guilt that I once felt. That gets duller with time. But even knowing what I know about bipolar disorder now, I don't know what I would have done or could have done. And that's...
Well, your job. Okay, well, see, I don't think that's any different than if this lady had died of neuroblastoma. You would say, I don't know what I would have done or could have done. Well, that's the oncologist's job. So for you to ask the question about this lady who you believe has bipolar disorder, I don't know what I could have done or should have done, that's the mental health professional's job.
But you can't guide someone toward that, or
Well, she was seeing some. She was.
I know.
Okay. Let me kind of go off script, okay? Guilt has gotten a really bad rap. Okay. One of the things I don't ever do, I never try to talk anyone out of their guilt. Okay? What guilt means is this is an indicator of how much I love that person. And think what a kind of a wretched soul I would be if I didn't feel guilty. Okay? What I've learned is I try to take away somebody's guilt. Guess what happens? They're going to hang on to it forever. If I bless the guilt, if I reframe the guilt, if I say guilt is a necessary part of healing, guilt is an indication of how much you love that person. Guilt is an indication of what I wish I had done for my dad. I wasn't able to do for my dad. We don't like feeling guilty, okay? So I don't feel guilty, and I don't want you to feel guilty. Okay, so what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to take care of your guilt, because if I take care of your guilt, then maybe you've got this crazy thing going on, it ain't going to work, okay? Let me bless your guilt. It is an indication of how much you love someone. Does that make any sense?
Yes.
Now I realize that may be kind of weird, but Jack?
Well, like you said, I don't know everybody's situation here. I have a friend who died less than a year ago of suicide, and I want to ask you a little bit about it, because we still wonder why. And I guess my main thing is about the 2-year thing, and if these can be planned ahead of time, and obviously they were. So he was inside the 2-year. He's 36 years old. He had several problems, and they said no water, because some led to the other. He was an alcoholic at 36. He was a drug addiction at 36. And he was had family issues, and he had lots of breakups with girlfriends and stuff. But 2 months before he died, October 1st of last year, he had gotten into church. He was not a church person. He had come to a regular Bible study. He had come to regular healing services here at this church. He had reconciled with his girlfriend and was engaged, or about to be engaged. And stopped drinking, stopped taking drugs, had gone to rehab, had to be tested, so we knew he had stopped. Everything looked good, and this was August, September of last year. October 1st, he killed himself. So we think it was planned. No matter how much better he had gotten, it would seem like he had planned it and was going to carry it out. And I don't know if that's even a question, but these can have a lot of demons, and then even though you get rid of maybe 4 out of 5, you can still be subject to.
And when you describe this, hang on to the mic, Jack. When you describe this, you describe both of these issues.
Yeah.
Perceived burdensomeness and purported belongingness, okay? And one of the things we see with people, and you described it, is as unusual as this may sound and as uncomfortable as we may feel with this, sometimes people who have decided to end their lives are very happy because they have created for themselves a legitimate option for how to deal with their pain. And that's a story that I hear time and time again.
It's legitimate in their mind.
It's legitimate in their mind, exactly. Yeah, their plan makes them happy because it solves their problems. It, you know. But you're also describing someone who may not be talking to anybody objectively, who may not be accountable to anyone. There's a significant correlation between substance abuse and depression, and so if he's not drinking, then you still have a depressive order sitting there kind of raw. Okay.
Right.
At least, no, I mean this sarcastically, but at least he was treating it with alcohol, so there was some relief. Okay. But you pull the veil of alcohol up, and you have really raw, untreated, stubborn depression. Okay. So you know it's hard to say. But the main thing is you're describing this.
Yeah, and his dad put him in the Priory for 30 days, and he signed back up for another whatever insurance covered. So it was like more like 40 or 45 days, and that would be like June and July, and then August so October 1st it was over.
Right. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna say real quick, like, I think I read some of this minor stuff in like a college course or something. And
Did you go to FSU?
no.
Good.
Like one way, because the perceived burdensomeness, like some people have like asked about that a bit and stuff, and like one way that it was described that I thought was pretty clear to me is it's just the idea that the world is going to be better if you're gone. Does that make sense?
But my family doesn't have the financial problems.
Right, but if I'm gone, everyone else will be happier and better.
Right.
So.
Right.
I
Exactly.
don't know.
That's
But what is that exactly? Do you know what I mean? So that makes sense.
Thank you. That's a nice way of saying it. Yeah. Right here.
I have a question about the Schneidman's, the list of thwarted needs, but then afterwards there was the also identified lethality as a key ingredient. How do you mean lethality in that context?
Lethality, and Joyner borrowed from Scheidman, who was kind of our first guru. Lethality meaning the ability to enact a lethal self-injury. Okay, and that was what Joyner borrowed from. One must accrue the ability to enact a lethal self-injury. Is that pretty clear? No.
I've seen evidence of not keeping promises in that one person who went to this church who was seeing the rector about suicidal issues promised not to do anything and immediately went out and killed himself.
Verbal contracts don't work. It's painful stuff. Bob?
This lady asked, she's a pastor too, or she is a pastor, about pediatrics. How do you suggest, especially with the little ones, is it mainly the family that has to perceive that in the school, or because that is really tragic?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that that's where it starts, where the, you know, hopefully there's one or two parents paying attention to what's going on with this kid and notes changes in behavior and changes of mood and changes of sleep and changes in appetite and all the things we talked about last week. Yeah, that's where it has to happen. And that's why schools have school counselors that are free. And so those are important things.
Also have internet bullying today.
You have, yeah, George Dutcher, great Presbyterian, said, and I forget the context, but he said the same wax that melts the clay, the same sun that melts the wax hardens the clay. And that's, for me, is the internet. Okay? It is a wonderful, wonderful tool. And it is absolutely the devil.
One of the, I have years of experience with DCF as a case manager, where I worked a lot with adolescents who've attempted Baker acting, and you have to work with them. DCF made a lot of changes just a few years ago, and this is where it's important to listen to your children. He was 7 years old and hung himself, and in Miami, down in that area, where he had a conflict with medication, with the ADHD, and he was coming off of it. They don't know how long. He refused to take it. He ended up committing suicide. And it's real. And even if, regardless of how old they are, we need to listen and take it serious.
Yes, sir.
On the adolescence piece, because I think we talked a little bit about that. I fear that it's going to get worse, and I think, in my opinion, sometimes it's a symptom of something that's a bit larger, and it's that we've systematically removed any attachment to a higher purpose, and we've started worshiping self instead of God. So then children are growing up, and you know, if self is all it is, and you're bullied, your entire world is attacked, right? And maybe that's not just adolescence, that can carry forward. So. Kate and I were very, very happy. We're new in this church. We're very happy to find this community because of what we're doing out in the community and what this congregation does out in the community. So we're very blessed to be here, and we're very thankful for that.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Sometimes that starts classroom. There's perceptive teachers that sometimes they'll see a picture, or they'll have a paper that comes and they don't like the way it's written or what it's saying.
Yeah.
And it's maybe a cry for help, and they're have to pick up on it. So you can start right in the classroom.
And we all have experiences with things that we know happen here, there, and yonder, okay? What I really want us to pay attention to is your next door neighbor, okay? What I want you to pay attention to is the person you haven't seen in worship for 3 weeks in a row. What I want to see you pay attention to is someone who all of a sudden his or her countenance has changed dramatically. Okay? Yeah, we have problems with 5-year-olds in Miami and school teachers being, yeah, we have all that. Okay? But I want everybody to take some ownership. There was a guy in the seminary who did his master's paper. I forget the title of it, it's not important, but he got permission from a whole bunch of pastors of different flavors and he sat with them, and he got a list of names of people who at one time had been very active in church life and for 10 years had not been involved. Still lived in the community, same address, blah, 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 didn't join the church, blah, blah, blah. And he got permission to go and interview these hundreds of families. And he wrote his master's thesis about this, why these people were no longer They were churched, but they were unchurched, okay? And what he found out, I think, is simply amazing. That these people told him stories of their no longer being involved in the life of the church because rites of passage were not honored or paid attention to. Because a kid went off to the army and nobody noticed. 16-year-old got a driver's license. Somebody lost a job. Somebody had a parent die. And all these rites of passage happened, and nobody in church paid any attention. And they just kind of backed up and backed out. And they were no longer involved in the life of the church. It wasn't because the gospel wasn't being preached. It wasn't because the elements, the sacraments weren't done properly. It was because nobody came to see me or attend to us when my husband lost his job or when my kid joined the army. Okay? And those are the little places where all this stuff starts. With loss and grief and pain and misery and death. That's where it starts, okay? And that's what I think we need to do better at. I really think that's where we need to be forming community. And that's where, as the Pope said, you folks need to be smelling like you folks.
I agree with what you just said.
Thank you.
I was a nurse for 40 years of my life. The last 16 as a mental health nurse doing crisis stabilization unit. I was the charge nurse of crisis stabilization unit.
God bless you.
In Arkansas and in Texas.
God bless you.
And loved it. Well, then when I was 50, God called me into ministry. And I started taking care of another group of God's folks. And I serve as chaplain now at Westminster Village here in Pensacola. And I heard those things that you just said from my patients and from the ones I serve now as chaplain. I was always one of the ones that brought up the question of asking about their spiritual health as well as their emotional and their medical. Over and over again, I heard people say that very same thing you said. I don't go to church anymore. Would you mind sharing with me why? And their answer would be what you said. Things happened in my life, and nobody from my church ever checked on me. Mm-hmm. And I figured, why be a part of a group like that that says what you're supposed to be doing is taking care of your neighbor, and they didn't do it. And I still hear it from my folks where I serve now as chaplain, and it's sad. It's very sad.
But this is why we start conversations like this. Got time for one more question, if there is one more question.
We have a quickie about Hawking tonight. So on Monday being the biggest day for
Okay.
suicide, I was thinking about that, so what you said was something about, I think on Sundays, I think they're in church or wherever they go, confessing what they're about to do. And then Sunday, I was surprised it was not the least day, it was the middle of the pack. Then on Monday, they carry it out after they talk to the Lord.
Well, you're assuming they're in church on Sunday, but
wherever they go, yeah.
they might be Roman Catholic there on Saturday. Everybody feeling kind of great right now? This is really complicated, tough stuff, okay? Again, there is nothing I do in my office, there is nothing I teach that is more emotionally draining and heartbreaking and painful than this. And I am grateful for your attention and your questions, and please be back, and please bring your neighbors. Dr. Hodges will be here to deal with anxiety, and we will continue. Grace and peace. Thank you.
Thank you.